How do public participation networks work? With Catherine Lane.
As Fiona said, my name is Catherine Lane. I'm a policy officer with the National Women's Council. I'm interested in all things local government, in all things local level, in all things happening, in local communities, particularly when it comes to women and underrepresented groups. And over the past, it's my second term now, I'm sitting on the Public Participation Network National Advisory Group, representing the community and voluntary pillar. So this is an area of my work that I'm quite familiar with and have been involved on for a number of years now. Before the National Women's Council, I worked as a community worker in Ballyfermot and also in Ballymun. So would have been very active and involved in participation and local decision making and making sure that people that are most affected by decisions and policies have an opportunity and resources, and the conditions are there to support their engagement and participation. And there was a big sweep of reform that was brought in by Phil Hogan, Minister Phil Hogan, people might remember him, called the Local Government Reform Act. So local authorities were instructed to establish public participation networks in each local authority area. So as I said there, this was the first time actually in law that, local authorities had to actually say, we're going to consult with the community and voluntary sector, environmental sector and social inclusion sector. So it's written down in law, in legislation, that we have a right to be consulted. There was a policy paper called Putting People First, and this was all about reforming how local participatory democracy works for people and making sure that all citizens, residents, local people could have a say in what happens in the local area. So public participation networks enable the public to take an active and formal role in the policy-making activities of local authorities that will affect their communities. And as you all well know, and even from the information that you shared when you introduced yourself at the beginning of the session, a lot of the issues that local government and local authorities have responsible for have a really big impact on the quality of our lives and how we live our lives and how we can live our lives with dignity and with choice and with equality. They're closest to our lives, so they can have really a big impact.
Wicklow Public Participation Network, PPN.
What is a PPN?
County Wicklow PPN is made up of a diverse network of community groups and voluntary organisations working at a local level throughout the county. Public participation networks, or PPNs, have been established in every county and each local authority area nationwide.
Why have a PPN?
To provide a structure through which the community voice and local expertise can be fed into a number of local decision-making bodies, including the Wicklow County Council Strategic Policy Committees.
What does a PPN do?
Provides networking opportunities and facilitates information sharing, promotes civic engagement, enables the community voice to be heard, nominates community representatives to decision-making bodies, supports groups to grow and develop.
How does County Wicklow PPN work?
Groups register by the municipal district in which they operate. There are 5 municipal districts in County Wicklow: Arklow, Baltinglass, Bray, Greystones and Wicklow. A municipal plenary happens when all the member groups from a municipal district come together. Groups also select which college describes the primary focus of their group. There are 3 colleges: Environment, Social Inclusion and Community and Voluntary. A county plenary happens when all the member groups come together. This is where the main decisions are made. The Secretariat coordinates and oversees the work of the PPN between plenary meetings. The Secretariat is made up of nominees from each of the municipal districts and each of the 3 colleges. Linkage groups are formed around specific interests, for example housing or planning. Linkage groups provide information and feedback to support the PPN representatives.
Why should my group register?
To keep informed of plans and decisions for your area. To feed into plans and shape local policy. To be part of a strong collective voice for communities. To network, raise your profile, share experiences and support each other. Find out about funding opportunities, training and other supports. Membership of the PPN is free.
There's been an agreed set of values that this is how we should do the work and this is how we should engage with people. And those values are inclusive, participatory, independent, valuing of diversity, transparent and accountable. And of course, I think you're going, or maybe you've already done some work around values and how sometimes we kind of think they're over there and we do them and we all work on them and then no one ever looks at them ever again. But they're really important in how, even if you were thinking about getting involved in PPNs and you were coming up against challenges or you were feeling this isn't really what I thought it would be, or I'm finding this very difficult. It's going back to, well, are they actually being inclusive? Or are they telling me what, how decisions are made, or are they telling me how they do things? So this is about trying to put a structure on something that's actually quite, in some ways it's not that it's unmanageable, but it's fluid, it's dynamic, it's changing. Community groups are we're all, they're comprised of human beings and we're all change and we jump in and out of things at different times and we want different things and we don't all agree. So, it's hard to sometimes put a structure on it, but this is what the government have set out to do. And this is their policy. Like I said, there's legislation there. They're investing in this. So this is the structure that they've come up with. PPNs are administered by a voluntary secretariat who is then supported by a resource worker. So the funding for a resource worker comes part from the Department of Rural and Community Development and the other part from the local authority. So that's about showing a commitment from the local authority that they're serious about participation, so that they actually give money to it. So you always want to follow the money. You see where is the money going? Who is it benefiting? Are people serious about this? All decisions, there's what we call in the Public Participation Network a flat structure. So there's nobody in charge, and that's supposed to try and stop, little dictatorships happening in local communities where one person kind of decides we're doing this, this is the position. So this is about everybody having an equal say. So all decisions are taken by a plenary, the plenary is all of the registered groups who are members of the PPN. They meet at least twice a year and they agree what the work plan is. And normally, because there's funding, there's governance, there has to be an agreement as well between the PPN and the local authority on how they're going to work together. And they have a kind of a shared a memorandum of understanding and a shared agreement of how things are going to work. They put a financial and a work plan in place. The PPNs are defined as being independent from the local authority and from any political or vested interests. So if you're running for a political office, or you'd have to step down from being a member of the secretariat of the PPN, for example. So although they're funded from central government, from the Department of Rural and Community Development, and they're also funded from the local authority, they're supposed to be directed by the plenary, which is the membership, which is the community voluntary groups, environmental groups, and social inclusion groups. And for credibility for the PPN and for independence and for it to be able to, be critical of the policies and decisions of local authority, it's very important that independence is maintained and respected. But that's sometimes where we get into some of the challenges as well in terms of that independence from local authorities. So to join the Public Participation Network, you have to be part of a group. So you can't join as an individual. I, Catherine Lane, can't, join my PPN in Dublin City Council, for example. I have to be part of a group which has 5 or more people and that has been around for 6 months or more. I have to have a postal address. It has to be volunteer led. So that's, run by a voluntary board, for example, not associated with a political party, be independent and have some kind of governance structure. So maybe a constitution or something like that that says what our group is about. So depending on what group you're in, you're going to be divided up into one of these colleges. So you might be a community and voluntary group. So you might be a sports group, for example, or you might be part of Tidy Towns, or you might be part of, Scouting Ireland or something like that, and that would fall under community. And then environment is obviously our, environmental groups at local level, and you would come under that. So depending on, the makeup of your group and what the purpose of your group is, you then get divided up into particular college. And then there's the social inclusion college, which I thought was probably more relevant to the work that you're all doing together as local activists and campaigners. So, where do you fit? You would fit, about addressing inequality issues, social justice, addressing poverty, and community development work. And they're generally the types of groups that would fit under the social inclusion college. So disability groups, traveller groups, women's groups, literacy, older people, LGBT groups, youth service and groups, mental health, suicide prevention. So there are some of the groups that would fit under the social inclusion college. So the main focus for you to fit under social inclusion, the main focus has to be on improving the opportunities of those who are marginalised in the local community. So as we were saying about the structures, like structures do matter, and sometimes it's the more difficult work that we can do in terms of trying to bring about positive change for in local communities. So I've taken this quote from a Slovenian non-governmental organisation. Once you change who decides the policy, you change the policy itself. And as you'll see from this diagram, which hopefully is clear, at the centre you have the secretariat and the worker. So you have this resource worker or coordinator, sometimes they're called, depending on the local authority area that they're in. So they're at the centre of this flat structure. The plenary nominate members onto the secretariat. So really the resource worker is reporting to the secretariat, who decides the direction of the PPN. So it's not supposed to be decided by the government. It's not supposed to be decided by the local authority. It's decided by the membership. This secretariat then will nominate people onto these different decision-making structures. So for example, you might have a local community development committee. Some of you might be familiar with that structure. And they might have a seat for a community and voluntary rep, and they might have 2 seats for a social inclusion rep. So they will then go to the PPN and say, we have these vacancies, we need them to be filled. And then there's an election process that happens in the PPN and people vote. So it's quite similar to our representative democracy structure. People put themselves forward, and then people decide, and you're voted on and you get nominated onto that structure. And the types of structures include, like I was saying, the local community development committee, strategic policy committees, which you might have covered when you did the session on local government, but also other types of structures as well, like children and young people services committees, joint policing committees. So it can be used for other representative structures at local level as well. And you'll see there's a kind of a linkage group icon there, a link together. And sometimes people who have been community representatives in the past, who have been nominated onto bodies or onto different forums, can feel a bit alone when they're on these. They don't feel they have the backup, or they don't feel they have somewhere to go with the issues. This linkage group is about that. So I sit on, for example, I sit on the joint policing committee. So every so often before the meetings, I bring together my linkage group. And this is made up of people that are interested in this area, and they're going to support me in my role. And I'm going to tell them what happens at these meetings. I'm going to feed back. So there's a 2-way kind of dialogue happening. So you're always connecting back in with the wider membership, but then you feel you're supported when you're providing that, really important representative role on these structures. At the moment, there's an organisation called the National Oversight and Audit Commission, and they actually measure the performance of local authorities. So they look at a whole range of different things. Do look at the performance of public participation networks. And there's 2 things they look at the moment. Unfortunately, it's only numerical things. They're counting. And look, we know this from being involved in government things, that they look at sometimes quantity and not necessarily quality. And that's where we really have to go with this. So we know at the end of 2020, in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, there were 17,780 groups registered with public participation networks. They also measured the percentage of organisations that opted to be part of the Social Inclusion College. And that's 16%. 16% of that total 17,000 total membership represent the Social Inclusion College. And like I mentioned that because I think that's important in terms of what we're interested in: equality, a social justice agenda. These are the voices of people who are underrepresented, who are marginalized, who are seldom heard, hard to reach, whatever label you want to put within the PPN structure. So this again kind of brings a question about who's represented, who gets listened to, and are we still speaking to people who maybe have the most resources, have the most time, are the most educated, and are, have a lot of income, and that's quite small, 16% in terms of. So is that voice being diluted? And that is a challenge. Also, PPNs have to submit an annual report every year, and those are available. They have annual conferences, which haven't happened during COVID, but they plan to have another one in March in Wicklow next year. And they invite all of the PPNs together to talk about the work of the PPN, to showcase what's happening. And I think this is a resource that was shared from the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, did a case study on PPNs as part of all of their work, looking at how they engage citizens in public participation in public policy. It did replace the community and voluntary fora, and it created a lot of conflict because, again, local communities felt government are, saying, get rid of that structure, put aside all of the work you've done over there. Now we want you to operate this type of structure. So it was coming top down. So that just created a lot of tension and a lot of mistrust. But now we have to try and untangle this new structure and figure it out how it's going to work in our local community. And absolutely, the membership is open and it's free to join to all community and voluntary organizations. But of course, like I said, you have to be part of that group. And that group has to be, like this group, you have to feel like it's with like-minded people and you have a similar agenda. And people don't always have groups in their local area that fit that bill. So then where do they go? And I mean, there's different levels of engagement then as a member of PPN. I mean, you can just get the emails, get the newsletters. You can, vote, you can attend the plenaries, you can put yourself forward for nomination. But because we've gone down a similar track to how our almost national and local politics works, certain people do better in those kind of, nominations. And again, like Fiona said, it can be men who do better in those, or it can be, people from other communities. For example, we hear a lot from traveller organisations that they don't get the votes when they put themselves forward, when really they're a crucial stakeholder that should be involved in these decision-making structures. Like they should be on all the housing and accommodation strategic policy committees, for example, because who when we think of who is most impacted and affected by local government decisions, who's the poorest outcomes, who's living in poor accommodation, those kind of things. So, there should be another system. The system isn't going to bring forward those underrepresented voices because of how it's set out. So there's so many issues with that. Claire, I'll take your question.
The climate action, I thought was very interesting, the way that the woman from Israel had accessibility issues. It just highlighted it, and I suppose they should have cared more about it, considering that all the leaders of the world were there. I just thought it was interesting.
It's like we can only think about one thing at one time. It's like we're thinking about climate now.
Yeah.
So we can't think about it. And of course, other people will have alerted them to, disabled people face real and imminent threats from climate action. Both because of the mitigation strategies that they're proposing, but because disabled people are more likely, to be poor and to live in poorer parts of the world, or not have the same access to information or all the things we know about inequalities.
Yeah, like I was at a group recently, and it was eye-opening. Catherine was at the same group, and an awful lot of the young people that were there, they were very interested in climate change. And I know that's important, but we are trying to highlight some of the other issues, like this systemic kind of ableism, or the inaccessibility as a disabled person, and climate is great, but there, like, the whole thing about plastic straws, that whole debate is still going on. And for some disabled people, it's actually more hygienic and easier to use. Like those metal straws, they're hard to clean, but nobody sees that. They just see, oh, climate change is the way forward. They don't actually see, oh, well, how will this affect a certain group, or how will that affect another group?
There's no point bringing about positive change if it's not going to impact people equally, in the same, or if it's going to have a negative, disproportionate impact because you want positive change in some area. It's where really the vision of public participation networks, if they can continue to progress and strive to what they could be, where a really strong vehicle for participatory democracy, which is about people that are not heard and are not listened to having a say in a way that suits them and in a way that works for them, and in a way that has the greatest impact for the greatest number of people, particularly people that are most disenfranchised or marginalized. And the issue, I suppose, with getting things done, the traditional way of getting things done in local government and local authority is you're ringing a person, and depending on how they view you, how they, is this a person I need to listen to? Is this a person that has, power themselves maybe, or have, has resources? But if you're coming in through the PPN, the idea is that you have a collective behind you, you have strength in numbers, and that you can actually influence these things so that, you stop them from happening, this bad planning, these poor decisions that are made in offices or remotely that don't actually have any real life, experience, or they're not tested in any real way with real people who live in that community. And that's really what it should be about, like having better decision making, having more people involved, people feeling that they're being listened to and have a say. Opportunities, to try and keep that in our minds as we may encounter frustration, and we may encounter just a resistance to doing things differently, doing things better. That women and disabled people continue to be underrepresented in civil and public life, and that's not fair and that's not right. So we have a right to be there, and we have a right to have our voice heard and have a say. There is an opportunity. It's imperfect, it's flawed. There is an opportunity there for dealing with issues and providing solutions. There's an opportunity because local government is close to people's lives. There's an opportunity because we know we need more innovative ways of gathering views and working with people which actually fit into the realities of people's lives. And we need to use all the skills, experience, and knowledge in our communities to address those global issues like climate change, like racism, like ableism. So we need all the people that are part of our local communities involved. Why bother? It's government policy. Government have said it's important that we hear from the public, and that people can participate. So there's commitments there, there's obligations, but bringing them into reality is a challenge, and that gap from the policies to actually implementation. But it is there, the policies are there. We have a right to have our voices heard. There's an opportunity, even though there's, things are slow. Local authorities particularly are very hierarchical, traditional, conservative, but they want to be seen to be doing things in a right way as well. They don't want bad publicity. So there is an opportunity to change policy and funding and priorities. And like all of you here this evening, you know the issues and you know what's required to overcome the issues. You have a critical mass even yourselves here, as a group, and there's great strength and power in people coming together on issues to try and bring about change. Through the PPNs, you can access officials, build relationships, try and get things done in different ways. It's about accountability. This is local government. They're a public service. It's part of our public system. They get public money. They should be accountable to us, in terms of the provision of local services, provision of democracy. And it is an opportunity to develop new skills. I'd encourage you to join your local PPN. Get involved in the National Women's Council. We have a disabled women's group. If people wanted to get involved in the women's movement and work around women's equality issues, get a copy of your local economic and community plan. See what the local authority is committed to doing. Ask for a meeting, with officials in the local authority. Check what's available online. Can you attend meetings on serve a meeting, take part in consultations, and then reflect like you're doing as part of this. But it's about asking questions when we're all in all these spaces and in all these rooms. Like, who's missing? Are the people we're talking about who are affected, are they here? Have we involved them? Have we not just asked them, but are they involved in an ongoing basis? How will this issue impact individuals and groups? And then we always need to be kind of checking, because if you do engage in these structures in a voluntary capacity, and often that is the nature of the engagement, it's unpaid, which is one of the challenges in terms of people's resources and time. But we have to, if we're asking people to give their time and give their expertise, they have to know that they're making a difference.